lead of them. Look on the ASA. Oh my gosh. They're all going against the wind.
It was basically a cube inside of a sphere where the points of the cube were touching outside of the sphere.
So this isn't anything that just is limited to the United States. It's a worldwide phenomenon.
Hi everyone, and welcome to your Contact in the Desert free host window. My name is Andy McGrillen, and I host That UFO podcast. I am Scottish. There's no subtitles for the video, so I'll try and speak as slow as possible for you. But I'm going to be with you for the next 45 minutes with a guest and friend of mine over the last year as I've come to know him. A little bit about my podcast. So That UFO podcast has been going now for round about 1 year, just over 1 year. It's grown really quickly. I'm based in the UK, but I've had guests and chats like Lou Elizondo, George Knapp, Avi Loeb, Brandon Fugel, James Fox coming up, Jeremy Corbell's coming up, and many of the speakers you're going to see and hear at Contact in the Desert as well. So I'm really excited to speak to Ryan Sprague of Somewhere in the Skies. Ryan, how are we?
How's it going, man? Hey, it's been an exciting few days to say the least. So I'm sure we got plenty to talk about here at Contact in the Desert.
It's been a crazy few days and weeks, and obviously counting down to the 25th of June, which was the start of Contact in the Desert. It was that report going to drop on the same day, and that's just blown up, and the whole world seems to be looking at UFOs, UAPs, aliens, and everything. So it's a really, really good time for it. It's been planned extremely well in that sense.
Genius marketing, Contact. Genius marketing.
almost like they knew, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Ryan, we've spoke several times as well, and we've both got podcasts that have a very similar subject matter, but in their own sense are very different as well, which is great. Contact in the Desert this year is huge. 70 speakers, I believe, at last count, if not slightly more. You are one of those speakers. You're a busy man in general. You're never usually in one place for long at any one time. You globe hop, but you're here for Contact in the Desert, and you've got some cool stuff you'll be doing. So tell us what you're sharing this year.
Yeah, absolutely. So yesterday, actually, I hosted a panel at Contact in the Desert with military eyewitnesses. And I actually got to speak with Gary Voorhees, Jason Turner, and Matthew Roberts, who are all in some way somehow connected to the now famous Tic Tac UFO event, the Gimbal, and the Go Fast. So for anyone who doesn't know, I am a UFO researcher who focuses on the people who have experiences and how it affects their lives and changes them in many ways. So it was a very rare glimpse into the personal lives of these three former military witnesses and how these events affected them. You know, we've got the videos, we've got the testimony, we've got the documents, but how did it affect the people who actually experienced it? So we had an incredible conversation over there, and we had some pretty stunning revelations as well, some developments in the Tic Tac event. So I was really excited to share that with the audience at Contact in the Desert.
Now, what more can I tease out of you? We want people to go and watch to get the full effect of that anyway, but that's going to have pricked people's ears up. So what kind of content can they expect within that?
Absolutely. So we know now that these Tic Tacs were caught on radar, and these were objects that were seen in the air over the Pacific Ocean near Catalina Island. Chief radar operator Kevin Day was the one who first tracked these for various days until he finally was the one to send the intercept for the fighter jets to go up and check these things out. And that ultimately led to the video we saw. And what is coming to light now with two of the witnesses I spoke to, Jason Turner and Gary Voorhees, is that there were possible sensors and possible tracks under the water that were recorded as well. This has been speculative and rumored for a while, but these guys are getting closer to finally finding out if that's true or not through various other military witnesses who have not come forward yet with the Tic Tac event. So Gary did share some updates on that, where that all stands, and I'll let him speak for himself for anyone who wants to go back and watch the panel in the archive streams for sure.
Absolutely. That's pretty fascinating in itself, because one thing that's been really prevalent in a lot of the recent drops for videos and pictures that we've had, and this is something you've been involved in for years, is they look great. And if you've got an interest in the subject already for UFOs or UAP, you find them intriguing, but they leave enough room for ambiguity because there's either a lack of corroborating data or it's hearsay. And when you see or hear about the Tic Tac, it sounds incredible, but it still has that it's a bird, it's a flock of seagulls, it's a missile being tested. However, when you start to add in that additional data that Gary's going to be talking about, if things are going under the water, that adds a new dimension to it, because that's no longer a deflating balloon traveling at speed, and especially how they get these tracks. That's really interesting. What do you think about the incident itself? How's it changed over the years for you, now that you've obviously spoken to Gary and other witnesses like that?
Right. So when the video first leaked, I mean, that Tic Tac video had been in the public domain much longer than 2016, 17, when the New York article broke, but New York Times, excuse me. It had been on various forums and whatnot. So that video had been out there for a while. It wasn't until years later when the DoD officially acknowledged it and released it themselves. A little late on that, in my opinion, but it was just a blurry video, man. And look, I wasn't impressed at first. I was like, cool, awesome. Like, add it to the other gun camera videos we've seen throughout the years as well. And then we started to hear about the actual documentation on the case. And that brought it more, into made it more credible, I guess is the way to put it. And then we got the testimony from everyone involved on different carriers from different vantage points. And all of the stories started to meld together into this cohesive, mysterious story of the Tic Tac event in 2004. So for me, I think the Tic Tac event is probably going to be the biggest seminal case we're going to be debating until the end of time. I mean, we're still finding more pilots. Alex Dietrich just recently came out with her testimony about it. And, the biggest skeptic in our community right now, Mick West, sitting down and having a conversation with this pilot and trying to figure out what it is. And they're both still scratching their heads and wondering, what did I see in terms of Alex? And why can't I explain this in terms of Mick West, who seems to have an answer for everything? So, I think it's awesome. I think it's exciting. And I think, these recent revelations in the UAP report are only going to help us start to uncover more about what happened with the Tic Tac.
And before we come to that report, and we are going to discuss that in the time we've got together, because I know, again, you're a busy guy, you've got stuff to do straight after this as well. You deal with the human aspect very well, really well, and one of the best of when it comes to UFOs, UAPs, and I can see your book just in the background there as well. Now,
that was not on purpose, I swear.
No, absolutely not. And the link starts scrolling across the bottom of the screen where you can buy the book. But you're speaking to Gary and Jason, and was it Matthew?
Matthew Roberts, correct? Yeah. Who was part of the Gimbal and Go Fast events.
Sure. How do you read them when they talk about this incident now? Because they have been, especially Gary's now been in the public eye for a couple of years since he appeared on Unidentified, and he's done various podcasts and different shows like that. When they speak, how do they come across about this incident? Is it somber? Is it something that still excites them, or do they still have a lot of questions?
So Matthew is the newest one for me personally, and I know he is the most recent to come forward as well. And he just recently came out with a book that I believe he's talking about here at Contact in the Desert as well. And I can tell, again, Andy, I think I like to pride myself on being able to judge people and their character and if they're being authentic. I've interviewed thousands of experiencers at this point. I'd like to think I have some idea of if these people are telling me the truth or not. And I will say, before we even started recording for the panel, I listened to these three guys talk back and forth together, and the lingo was just spot on, man. You could tell these are experienced Navy servicemen, and they know what they're talking about. Just, the words they would use and how they described things. And I got no sense that anything was exaggerated. They all just told their stories as they experienced it. So for me, it was really exciting to finally hear Matthew. I wasn't familiar with him before Contact in the Desert connected us. So I'm so happy that I now have someone else I can talk to and start to unravel these stories with him as well. So yeah, it's exciting.
I think that's the beauty of something like Contact in the Desert, especially being virtual this year for obviously reasons that can't be helped. But you do get to go and see a panel of someone you'll know, someone you've heard of, and then maybe someone else that you're not too sure of. And you realise, oh, they've got an interesting part to the story or perspective I've not heard before. And that goes without saying for many of the speakers as well. And I'm sure within some of the different workshops, you'll hear people mention different speakers who you may be interested in one field, like remote viewing, and you're aware of one person, but they mention someone else and you can go over and nip in and see them as well, which is great. Now, just remind everyone before we get on to talking a little bit about you, and I'm going to be asking you some questions as well, Ryan. What is your panel all about again, and how can they find it, and when can they find it?
Sure. So I believe it premiered yesterday, and it was called Military UFO Encounters, Conversations with Eyewitnesses. Flip that around. Conversations with Eyewitnesses, military encounters. So I believe it is available to stream for the next couple weeks or so, whatever pass you got at Contact in the Desert. And yeah, I mean, it was about an hour and a half. I had to edit it down, unfortunately, for Contact in the Desert purposes. But man, they fit a lot into that panel, and I was very blown away by it. I left having more questions than answers. But again, these guys, just because they're military, doesn't mean they're not human. These things affected them just like it does every other person in every walk of life. So yeah, I hope people check that out in the archives again.
Yeah, please do, people. Obviously, you're on the website already. If you're watching this, contactingthedesert.com. You can view the passes and you can access that content as well, like Ryan said, on demand for the next couple of weeks. Ryan, a little bit about yourself. Now, if someone is coming on to this, they may have seen you, especially if they're in the US on television. They may or may not have listened to your podcast. I imagine they would have, because it's a really good podcast. It's how I got into the podcasting subject for this side of like UFOs and aliens as well. There's not many better out there. I can guarantee you that. Now,
Thanks, man.
No, you're welcome. I've said that to you privately as well. That's not a lie. What was it that got you into this field to the point where your life is investigating UFOs, speaking to experiencers, and spending your days editing podcasts?
Yeah, it's a second job for sure. Anyone out there, especially Contact in the Desert, I know how hard this stuff is to pull together. So I commend anyone who has a podcast, especially you, Andy. You're doing an incredible job, man. You become my inspiration, and we keep each other going. It's like having a Dunkin' Donuts next to a Starbucks, right? Like
Yeah.
we keep each other at the quality we should be. Yeah, I guess I'll go through the abridged version. I saw a UFO when I was a kid. I was 12. This is in upstate New York. I had a sighting of a triangular formation of lights, a perfect equilateral triangle over the St. Lawrence River. My father was witness to this as well. And we did not see a machine or anything like that, but it was a perfect triangle, and it just floated over this river, completely silent, couldn't hear a thing. I could hear the water hitting the dock. That was really about it. And it headed towards Canada, which was actually right on the other side of the river, and disappeared. And me and my dad just stood there dumbfounded. And, you know, he kind of moved on with his life, but clearly I did not. I had nightmares about that formation of lights for years. And only a year later after that, I went to the library, just like a lot of people, and went to that back section in the corner with the Loch Ness Monster and Bigfoot and UFOs. And I took out a book by Stanton T. Friedman, and my life changed after that. I started interviewing witnesses. At age 13, I interviewed my first military witness, who is a Vietnam veteran who had a dramatic Foo Fighter encounter over the Pacific Ocean. And I was the first and last person that he ever told about this. He passed away several months after finally revealing this to me, a 13-year-old. So I was very honored for that. And ever since, I've just made it my I guess duty in the UFO field to really give a voice to the people who have these experiences. And you know, fast forward, I write for various outlets about the phenomenon and the people who experienced it. Most notably, probably Open Minds Magazine, and now The Debrief. And it's been a crazy journey ever since. Like you said, man, I've done some television, which is an experience in itself. I'm sure we could get to that, but I love it. I love meeting people. I love traveling. I love hearing their stories. And I think the more people who tell their stories to people like us, the more this topic is going to be normal. And the more we can shed that stigma that I think the Pentagon is trying to do as well from the inside with military encounters. So I see everything changing, and I'm so excited to be a part of that journey right now with everyone else.
What have been some of your personal highlights, aside from Contact in Desert, which I'm sure is up there? What have been some of your personal highlights in that time?
So I would have to say anytime I get to leave my, walk-in closet of an apartment here in New York City and travel and meet people. I mean, I've gotten to meet people in London who told me their stories. I've been to Nova Scotia and Halifax in Canada and heard incredible stories, including the Shag Harbor incident, UFO crash. So if your viewers and listeners aren't familiar, I highly suggest looking at that case. And all over the United States. I've been to every single state in the United States except North Dakota. I've never been to North Dakota, but I'm hoping to get there. And I have interviewed people in every single state. So for me, the most rewarding thing is, again, meeting people, hearing their stories, and adding it just to that long list, man, of everyone who's ever had an experience and was once afraid to talk about it. They're not now. And it's empowering. It truly is.
And my follow-up to that would be, what do you have against North Dakota? No, that's not. So now you've interviewed a lot of great people, and that was one of my favorite things to listen to. And my show has evolved and developed through. It's like my favorite band is Oasis, and they're famously, ripped off the Beatles. But if you're going to rip off the Beatles, then you borrow the bit from the best, don't you? And like your podcast, I've taken elements of yours and other podcasts I listen to and make it my own sort of style and try and go forward with that. If you had to recommend one interview for someone brand new right now to Ryan Sprague to go and listen to on your podcast, what would it be?
Oh, wow. That's such a good question. They're all my children. I love them all the same, that old cliche. But the one that's really coming to mind for me would have to be, and I know you've interviewed this gentleman as well, was Jeremy McGowan, who was in Air Force security. And he had this crazy experience in the Jordanian desert back during, the conflicts over there and everything. And he went to the base he was supposed to go to. He was told to guard this random guard a crate in the middle of the desert. He wasn't told what was in it and why he was guarding it. And then one night he witnessed a UFO in the sky that came directly over this crate and then disappeared out of sight. It made unbelievable maneuvers. Jeremy believes that whatever this UFO was doing there, it was trying to figure out what was in the crate. And then, he has some pretty interesting theories on what was in the crate and where it went after that. So I didn't know what I was getting into when I did that interview. I don't know about you either, man, but I can't believe the response that you got and I got to those interviews with Jeremy. It's been probably one of my most popular episodes to date. And again, it affected Jeremy in many ways. He is now a part of this community. He has taken it on himself to create a UFO tracking device that is literally mounted on his Jeep that he brings out wherever he goes to try to detect UFOs. So talk about changing someone's life, man. It's crazy. So I highly suggest people check out that episode. It's called The Crate in the Desert.
Awesome. You name yours a bit more creatively than I do. Mine's is just Jeremy McGowan. But like you say, Jeremy's got
the point.
Yeah, Jeremy's got the Osiris, as he calls it, which is a fully kitted out, I'm going to say Jeep, because that's the type of car it looks like to me. But if you imagine the Ghostbusters Ecto 1, but for UFO tracking, that is essentially what he has. He's hooked up with Skyhub, so he has the top of the line equipment all over this thing, and he has plans for it. So keep an eye on that one, but certainly check out those interviews with Ryan and Jeremy as well. Now, that's got you up to this point, and this point just seems to have been a case of 3 years has built up to what happened on Friday, where we had the 180-day deadline of the UAP task force report, and it dropped eventually around 4:15 p.m. Eastern time in the US, which for us in the UK was just after 9 p.m., which is always nice to stay up later, which we've had to do our whole lives. But it was it was requested for and led by the US, which, like it or not, this is a worldwide conference, so there's people listening to this from all over. The US, whether you like it or not, are leading the way in this topic, in this conversation. So there's going to be a huge opportunity for America to shape their narrative and how they want this to go. And it certainly seems like it's not going back in the box anytime soon. What were your initial expectations before it came out on the task force report? You've got the benefit of hindsight now, Ryan, and I know you've spoke about this on your podcast, so you can't make up that you knew exactly what was coming.
Exactly, man. So I've always been and I listen to people like former director of ATIP, Luis Elizondo, the beautiful poster you have there in the background, and many other intelligence sources that I've spoken to in military saying, don't expect much. Do not expect much. So I was one of the people who tempered my expectations. I went in really not thinking we were gonna, maybe a page. I literally expected like a 1-page memo to be like, UFOs are out there. We're looking into it. Stay tuned or whatever. But and look, I can't say I was disappointed. I was a little bummed that we didn't get specific cases brought to us in this report that came out. And something like 70 pages were in the classified version. The public got 9 pages. So again, a little deflating, but man, again, like you said, in hindsight, the first time I read it, I was like, okay. Not what was I expecting? No videos, no photos, no explanations per se. But the more you read this thing, it's so interesting how they worded all of this and broke it down. And I think it's a lot more positive in terms of what comes next than a lot of people are giving it credit for. I know a lot of people are like, it's exactly like Project Blue Book or all these other things the US government have done in the past to kind of brush it aside and move on with life. I don't see that happening, especially with this report, which if you want to get into details, we can. But yeah, that's my initial reaction. I was like, meh. Right now, 2 days later in processing it, I'm really excited. I think there's some interesting stuff in store.
Now, already from that dropping, and at the time we record this, it was almost 48 hours ago. It's Sunday evening as we talk, or Sunday afternoon in the US. There's already been fallout, and there has been action and consequence off the back of it. Almost immediately, there was a memorandum sent out, which, without going into the detail, because I'm not military and can't read these things very well, but essentially, Deputy Secretary of Defence instructing people that this should be reported now. They're telling everyone in the military, you report this, you talk about it. That's almost overnight getting rid of that stigma. You would hope. I've got no doubt at a grassroots level, it may still exist in some way, shape or form, but that would be a personal thing. But en masse, they're asking the US military to talk about this now. That in itself for me is a huge win and almost overtakes the importance of the report, as this is the next step already happening for me. What do you think about that, Ryan?
2 things. I think this memo by the Department of Defense is a million times more important than the 9-page report. And I'll get to that in a second. The other thing I want to touch on is the military witnesses that I interviewed in that panel. They were afraid to report this. I've spoken to so many military people who did not report it and never talked about it and held it in for years. But now look, man, literally the Pentagon here in the United States is saying, please report it and please do it in a timely fashion. And if you can, record it. We don't care if it's on official military sensors or cameras or your freaking cell phone. Like, we want to figure out what these things are because they could be a potential threat. Going back to this memo that you mentioned, 2 major things came out of that, I think. One is they want all military branches to report these things within 2 weeks of the event, which I think is amazing. Again, like, it gives us more immediate time, or I should say that military branch or what have you, to look into the event. And second, the memo also stressed that they want a permanent program. This UAP task force, it's a task force. Once the task is done, they move on. The task clearly is not done. So I think it's really important to really focus on what the DoD is saying, and that they want to take up the reins now, and they want to form some sort of permanent UAP collecting data program, which is super exciting. That's more than we could have ever asked for in terms of all this. So I look forward to whatever comes next with this hopefully permanent UFO group within the government.
Now, that is exciting, and I'm going to play devil's advocate here, though. What do you expect to come from that, though? Because there are some who would say it's the US government taking control. They will have a group that they will set up. What comes out will be what they want to come out, and it's just another way of getting the data out that they want out. Or do you think they have the best intentions, or not? Best intentions might not be the right phrase, but do you think they genuinely want to push this conversation forward just at their own pace?
Both. I think they are clearly in this for their own reasons. Again, I think a lot of this has to do with, and look, the report and the memo both said we need more funding. We need to increase the technology we're using to try to unravel these UAP incidents. Dude, what was it? They looked at like 24 cases and they could only explain one of them with a conventional explanation of a balloon, a deflated balloon. So they don't have the means to actually answer these questions that both they want and the public want. So I do think it's a way to get funding and to increase the technology they're going to use to try to understand these things and defend the United States. Yeah, of course, they have their own reasons for doing it. But we're now hearing of these sort of task forces or programs being set up in Japan, in South America, in several European places as well. So I think it's kind of like it's like a new Cold War of UFO tracking, which I think is cool. So while the United States might be leading by example, which they always seem to do, I hope that these other countries will hold the US to a certain standard when it comes to this topic. And hopefully a lot of that will trickle down to the public. We're going to see, I guarantee this, that classified report from the Pentagon. We're going to see leaks happen. We're going to see statements. Maybe we'll see videos. Maybe we'll see photos. Keep a lookout this upcoming week. That's all I'm going to say. It's going to happen. It happened with the Tic Tac video. It's going to happen again, because I do firmly believe people in the government want this information out to the public, even at the risk of their own careers. I do think that.
Now, I won't ask any more about the potential upcoming leaks or what may or may not come out, but on Tuesday, TMZ have a documentary where Jeremy Corbell is teasing potentially dropping some information as well. Would that be totally unrelated, Ryan, or do you think we're going to see something from TMZ? Now, TMZ, not that they would sensationalize anything, of course, right? And even a limited knowledge of TMZ in the UK, I know what it's all about. But do you think they genuinely have some new unseen footage that is going to be of interest?
No comment. No, I'm just kidding. I honestly don't know. Jeremy Corbell is a friend of mine and a colleague, and we do correspond regularly. That being said, like, I'm not the kind of researcher who would be like, give me what you got. Give me what you got. Like, Jeremy has a strategy, and he has clearly gained the trust of people within the intel community and the military to get these things. Now, the motivation behind that in giving it to Jeremy is a completely different story. I have no knowledge of that whatsoever. And I'm also not saying Jeremy's a part of any sort of disinformation campaign or anything like that. I firmly believe Jeremy does a good work and has really challenged the government when it comes to what they might have done before those videos came out and where we stand now. So possibly, I never in my life thought TMZ would be the one to like break something in the UFO world or get these exclusive interviews with senators and congressmen here in the United States that no one else was apparently able to get. So, hey, it's going to come from TMZ. Nothing surprises me anymore, man, in 2021. So,
but you know what? Who knows? You're totally right when it comes to Jeremy Corbell. It's nothing against him, but regardless who it was, and this includes Lou Elizondo, Chris Mellon, and others, especially Tom DeLonge, it's why them? That question always has to be asked. But why would you give it to them? There's the why not, which is a bit of an obvious one, but it is interesting, absolutely. Without going into details on those people, then I've mentioned TMZ, but Discovery has Discovery Unclassified has its own documentary out in the next few days, and then HBO Max has J.J. Abrams, who has had many different movies around the phenomenon, or mystery, sci-fi, really has a big interest in the subject. I mean, Star Trek obviously is up there in his his catalog. They're all coming out within a few weeks of each other. Now that can't be coincidence, can it? That we've had this report coming, and then obviously with the TMZ one, it's days after in Discovery. But J.J. Abrams' 4-part docuseries, that's been in the works for some time as well. So clearly there's people connected within Hollywood that are hearing that this is the time to get this stuff out.
Yes, there has always been a symbiotic relationship between Hollywood and the U.S. government. I mean, going back even to the 50s, it has been used for propaganda. It has been used for recruitment. Top Gun probably being the prime example. That movie was literally made with Air Force funding to get more dudes to go up there and fight for the United States, and it worked. I think recruiting went up. They said something like 80% after Top Gun came out, and we're getting Top Gun Maverick coming out soon. So who knows? That might be connected to all this again. Maybe we'll see the Tic Tac in the new Tom Cruise Maverick movie. But I digress. I would say look at the work of cinema professor Robbie Graham, who wrote an incredible book called Silver Screen Saucers, all about the relationship between Hollywood and UFOs. And I do think Hollywood is used to get information out to the public in some ways, and also to disinform the public. But I don't think it's a coincidence that all of these things are happening now. It's clearly a concerted effort for Hollywood to be like, UFOs are in the mainstream right now because of all this Pentagon stuff. Let's put something out there. Let's do it. That's how it works, man. I mean, and I don't fault production companies for doing that. You make what's in the zeitgeist at the time to get the most ratings. It's all about ratings. But I think the people involved with these things, people like Josh Gates and Jeremy and Nick Pope or whoever's on these things, including the J.J. Abrams series, they want to get their information out there. And what better way to get it out to millions of people than through television? So, hey, man, I've been there. While entertainment is one thing, I'm trying to get my information out to as many people as I can. So if I will use Hollywood, if they're going to use me, I guess is the way to put it. And I think that's what we're seeing right now. UFOs are the biggest thing on everyone's lips right now. And I think it's going to continue to be that way for a while.
Now, one more thing I want to touch on. We've looked at the military aspect of things with your panel. We've talked about Hollywood there as well. The scientific community, the mainstream scientific community, are one that has been very stubborn on getting on board with this conversation. Avi Loeb is one who seems to have broken away from the pack. Now, Avi is one of the main speakers at Contact in the Desert this year. You've spoken to Avi. I've spoken to Avi. Joe Rogan has spoken to Avi. Now, he has put himself out there in quite a big way. What does it say to you that we finally have someone who is a top guy at Harvard, to put it bluntly, coming out and having a conversation that, do you know what, maybe we should be looking at UFOs?
Yeah. So I've heard in the past couple of days that Avi Loeb has even said, hey, if the DoD wants a scientist to come in and work with them on this UFO thing, I'd love to be the one to do it. And I think he'd be perfect. Look, this guy is, I believe he said on your show and mine, someone's got to be the one to go out first and step on those mines so that the people behind them know what to look out for and can get to that next step quicker and more safely. And I thought that was such a beautiful analogy because I see him doing that. He's shunned by a lot of people in the mainstream scientific community, and he's respected by many others who were afraid to talk about UFOs, who were afraid to sort of challenge the scientific method in the ways that we have come to understand. So I think it's awesome that this guy's out there saying, that this object that came into our solar system could have possibly been some sort of extraterrestrial probe of some sort. Now, he doesn't say that is for sure what it is, but we have to ask those questions. So I think it's amazing. I think more rebellious scientists like him are what we need in this place where we put science on a pedestal. And in many ways, I respect that. But in others, I'm like, hey, you're not doing your job unless you're looking at all options. And this is still on the table. So groups like the Scientific Community for UAP Studies is something I think people should look into. Over 50 scientists who are willing to put their necks on the line and look into these UAP and hopefully work with the government if they want them to.
And I picked up on this at the time. Avi said it on various podcasts, including Joe Rogan, where, and some people picked up on a sense of he's looking to make money. But no, what Avi was getting at was he's happy to be involved, but it needs serious funding. Avi coming out and putting his neck on the line only goes so far. It's great there's someone talking about it, but it becomes a point it's just talk. Avi can only do so much. Same with those scientists involved within the SCU as well. It needs serious funding, and hopefully this is where it all comes full circle. And off the back of this UAP task force report, funding from the scientific community from whatever avenue, private or otherwise, starts to go out. So people like Avi and others come forward so that they start looking at this more seriously, to the point where we get our Neil deGrasse Tysons, who is a science celebrity, having a bit more of a serious conversation about it as well. Ryan, any final words or thoughts before we wrap up?
No, I thank you for doing this, Andy. Like I said, I'm a huge fan of the work you do. And I think it's so refreshing to see people like you and Deep Prasad and a lot of these other younger, diverse speakers at this event. I think Contact in the Desert has gone out of their way to diversify the people in this community and give people a voice that normally would not have that. So again, I think this is awesome that you're doing these interviews. And I know you got some other really cool ones coming up, but all I'll say is thank you. Thank you for this opportunity, for letting me give my thoughts. And if anyone is interested today, I'm also doing my lecture as well, A Human Approach to the UFO Phenomenon here at Contact in the Desert. So I hope they'll check that out as well. But other than that, man, this has been great. I'm so happy we got to catch up again. And yeah, many more conversations to be had, I'm sure.
Listen, you can check out Ryan on Twitter. He's got his at Somewhere in Skies Twitter handle.
At Somewhere Skies.
Somewhere Skies. You've got your Ryan Sprague at Ryan Sprague 51.
That is correct. Good job, man.
This is off the top of my
Guess
head.
what the
as well.
51 stands for?
Yeah, it's almost his age. And off the back of that as well, you can check out his podcast, available anywhere podcasts are available, and on YouTube. And also please check out his book titled Somewhere in the Skies, available on Amazon and all independent book sellers as well, I'm sure. Want to pick up on that one. Ryan, pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you so much, Andy. Have a good rest of your time at Contact in the Desert. We'll talk soon.
You too. That is all for this week's show. Thank you very much for listening. Please remember to leave the podcast a review on your chosen platform. You can like, retweet and subscribe. That would all be very much appreciated. The shows are being uploaded onto YouTube as we speak more and more. You can sign up at patreon.com/That UFO podcast to access shows ad-free as well. Please get in touch on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, That UFO podcast. Of course, on Twitter, it's at UFO UAPAM. And again, folks, as always, keep looking up. You never know what you might see.
It wasn't a Tic Tac and not quite a saucer, more like a hubcap designed by Chaucer, a little Baroque and quite steampunk, like Alice was playing bass for the Parliament of Folk. The little fucker hovered right outside of my window, and when I shoved out the screen, he made it an issue. I don't think he expected me to see his ass, but I'd had some champagne and smoked a little grass. Meditative game of state full on meta. I can't imagine how it could have been any better. I got to the top of the stairs and there he was. I'm like, you awake? I was about to abduct you, cuz. I jumped back and nearly kissed myself, and I climbed out the window after the elf, and I woke up in my bed and there was something on my head, and everything was weird, and everything was red. And I called up my boys. They thought this was noise. They thought it was a dream. They thought it was my toys. They thought it was my problems, and they think I should seek therapy. And I don't know what to do because it doesn't really scare me. If you really want to know who I think I be, I think it's you and me and us and we and him and her and that and she and that thing over there and what's that, Jake? If we're being serious, open your mind, consider your heart, consider time, consider your space, consider your lies, consider your life, consider your eyes. It wasn't a Tic Tac and not quite a saucer.
What's that in the class with you that sonic boom? Got sleep paralysis and got within my room.
It wasn't a Tic Tac and not quite a saucer.
What's that in the class with you that sonic boom?